If you can afford this dining set, I'll hand you my resignation letter before sunset." The laughter came instantly. It rolled across the luxury showroom like a wave, bouncing off polished marble floors and towering walls of glass. Several customers smiled. A few openly chuckled. One of the sales associates lowered her head to hide a grin. Standing in the center of the showroom, Simone Richardson simply looked at the man who had spoken. The afternoon sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, casting long golden reflections across rows of handcrafted furniture. The dining set between them was the most expensive piece in the building. Imported walnut, Italian leather, custom detailing. The price tag displayed a number large enough to make most visitors walk away after a single glance. Brandon Cole, the showroom manager, rested one hand confidently on the edge of the table. At 38, he carried himself like a man who believed he could identify wealth the instant it entered a room. His tailored suit fit perfectly. His polished shoes caught the light. His smile suggested he already knew exactly how this conversation would end. Simone stood several feet away in a simple navy blouse, dark slacks, and comfortable shoes. No designer bag, no jewelry, no visible signal of who she was. To Brandon, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong place. "I'm serious," he said as the laughter faded. "That table costs more than some cars." A nearby customer smirked. Another glanced at Simone with open curiosity. Simone lowered her eyes to the wood grain running across the tabletop. She traced the edge with her fingertips. "It's very well made," she said softly. What none of them knew was that she had not come to buy this table at all. She had come for something she had told no one. Something she had spent 20 years working up the nerve to do and 20 years finding reasons not to. And the strangest part, the part Brandon would have found impossible to believe, was that the laughter did not bother her in the slightest. It only told her she had come to the right place. She smiled, polite and unhurried, and asked a small question. "Could I see the rest of the collection?" Brandon's grin widened. He had no idea the woman in front of him held a net worth larger than some publicly traded companies. He had no idea that by sunset, every assumption he had made about her would begin coming apart, one thread at a time. And he had no idea that he was about to help her find the one thing she most feared was true. Simone followed a young associate named Emily through the gallery, while Brandon trailed several steps behind, still convinced the afternoon was amusing. The showroom stretched across nearly 20,000 square feet, each section staged to resemble a different room inside an extraordinary home. Sunlight poured through the glass, illuminating polished stone, imported wood, and arrangements that cost more than many families earned in a year. Simone moved slowly. She asked thoughtful questions about craftsmanship, sourcing, joinery. She inspected the stitching on the leather. She ran her fingers along hand-finished surfaces and studied how the drawers were joined. Emily quickly realized she was speaking with someone who understood quality at a level few customers ever reached. "You know a lot about furniture," Emily said cautiously. "I spent years learning how things are built," Simone answered. That was true in more ways than one. Long before she became one of the most respected investors in the country, Simone had grown up watching her father repair furniture in a small workshop behind their modest home outside Savannah. He taught her that appearances could be impressive, but structure revealed character. The lesson applied to people as easily as to wood. What she did not say was that the workshop no longer existed, or that she had never once been able to say his name in a room like this without something tightening in her chest. Across the floor, Brandon watched with growing impatience. Every calm question only irritated him. He expected embarrassment. He expected discomfort. Instead, she seemed entirely at ease, and her ease unsettled him more than any argument could have. "You've been very patient with the questions," Simone told Emily quietly. "Most people aren't." Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Honestly, most managers tell us not to spend time with," she stopped. "With certain customers?" Simone finished gently. Emily looked down. She didn't answer, but something in her silence answered for her, and Simone filed it away like a craftsman noting a hairline crack in otherwise perfect wood. They reached a section featuring custom dining collections built for resorts and high-end developments. The display occupied nearly an entire wing. Large presentation boards showed configurations, finishes, and options. How quickly could these be delivered in volume? Simone asked. Emily blinked. Volume. Hundreds of units. Before Emily could respond, Brandon stepped in. Most clients ordering at that scale already have procurement departments. His tone carried the familiar edge. It's not really something individual shoppers need to worry about. Simone only nodded, as though confirming something for herself. That makes sense. But here was the strange thing, and Emily noticed it too. Simone had not asked about hundreds of units as a fantasy. She had asked the way someone asks who has already done the math. And when Brandon turned away, Simone's eyes drifted to a small placard near the base of the display. A Meridian Hall collection. A Hartwell company. She read the second line twice. Her expression did not change. But her hand, resting on the edge of the table, went very still. The way a hand goes still when it touches something it has been afraid to touch for a very long time. She had spent 2 decades avoiding that name. She had not expected to find it printed on a placard at the bottom of a dining table. And she had no idea yet how much worse the truth would be than the name. Brandon Cole felt completely in control, and the feeling came naturally, because for years it had been rewarded. As manager of one of Atlanta's most prestigious furniture galleries, he spent his days with athletes, executives, developers. He had convinced himself he could read wealth within seconds. Watches, clothing, cars, neighborhoods. To Brandon, those things formed a language he believed he spoke fluently. The problem was that he had grown so dependent on appearances that he had stopped noticing character entirely. He did not know that this was not an accident. He believed his instincts were his own. How quickly could these ship in volume? Simone had asked, and Brandon had brushed it aside. But a question like that triggered an old reflex. He pulled out his phone and, almost without thinking, opened the customer system the company required all managers to use. He found Simone's name where Emily had logged her arrival. Next to it, in the field-marked client tier, a single coded letter had auto-populated from the intake records. B. Brandon smiled to himself. Of course, the system rarely got it wrong. He did not stop to ask why the system assigned tiers at all, or what happened to the customers it marked. He only knew that Tier A customers got his attention, and Tier B customers got handed a brochure for the Meridian Advantage program, the financing plan, the one with the friendly name and the paperwork nobody read closely. It had never once occurred to him to wonder where those customers ended up. If it had, he might have noticed that he could not name a single Tier B customer who had ever come back happy. He slid the phone away and rejoined the group, his confidence intact. "Have you decided which luxury development you're furnishing today?" he asked loudly enough for the nearest shoppers to hear. A few chuckled. Simone looked up from a material sample. "I'm still reviewing options." "Of course you are." More laughter. Emily flinched. And outside, unnoticed by anyone, a black luxury sedan pulled into the reserved space near the entrance. A second car eased in behind it a moment later. Through the glass, 2 men in tailored suits stepped onto the sidewalk and paused, checking something on a tablet before they came in. Brandon did not glance up. He still believed he was guiding an ordinary shopper through products she could never afford. He did not yet understand that the decision being made that afternoon was not whether Simone could buy the furniture. The real decision was whether his company deserved the chance to earn her business at all, and which of 2 very different reasons had brought her through the door. "Could I see pricing for the complete collection?" Simone asked. Brandon raised an eyebrow. "The complete collection?" "Yes." "Every configuration? Every finish?" "Yes." He laughed openly. "That would be a very large purchase." "I understand." Several customers turned. A man stopped midway through signing paperwork at another desk. A woman near the entrance lowered her phone. "Do you have a designer representing you?" Brandon asked. "No." "Procurement team?" "No." "A corporate purchasing office?" "No." Simone paused, and for the first time something flickered behind her calm. Not anger, but a kind of grim recognition. "I prefer to see things myself before I trust them." Brandon mistook it for naivete. "Then perhaps we should start with something smaller." He turned to Emily. "And let's not waste company resources generating proposals that aren't realistic." The words landed harder than he intended. An older customer frowned. An employee looked away. Emily's expression tightened. Then Simone's phone buzzed. A name lit the screen. She glanced down, and something in her shoulders loosened. Relief, and beneath it, dread. "Hello, Marcus," she said. The voice on the other end spoke briefly. "I'm still at the showroom." "Yes, I've seen several options." A pause. "You're already here?" Her eyes shifted to the entrance. Brandon followed her gaze on instinct. So did several customers. Through the glass doors, the two professionally dressed men had just entered the building. The moment Emily saw them, her eyes widened. So did the receptionists. Brandon, however, felt only mild irritation. More foot traffic. He still believed he controlled the room. He still believed Simone Richardson was an ordinary shopper pretending to belong in a world she couldn't afford. And standing only a few yards away, the men who knew exactly who she was had just walked in. A hush settled across the showroom as the two men crossed the floor. The older of them spotted Simone instantly. His face brightened. He moved toward her without hesitation, and employees paused mid-sentence to watch. Brandon remained where he stood, still assuming this had nothing to do with the woman he had spent the afternoon dismissing. "Ms. Richardson," the older man said warmly. "I hope we didn't keep you waiting." The words seemed to freeze the air. Emily blinked. Several customers exchanged confused looks. "Not at all, Marcus," Simone said. Marcus Reed extended his hand. Almost everyone in Atlanta's business community knew the name. Chief executive of one of the largest commercial development firms in the Southeast. The second man, younger and quieter, carried a slim leather folio and said little. "The board approved the final expansion plans this morning," Marcus said. "Congratulations." "Thank you. We were hoping to review furnishing partners. Have you selected one?" Simone glanced around the gallery. The question seemed simple, yet the entire room had gone quiet. "This location was one of our leading candidates," Marcus continued. "The contracts would cover all 6 properties." Emily nearly dropped the folder she was holding. 6 properties. Brandon felt a strange pressure build in his chest. For the first time all afternoon, uncertainty entered his eyes. He recognized Marcus Reed now, and the way the man deferred to the woman in the navy blouse rearranged something in Brandon's understanding of the room. Quietly, completely, like furniture being moved in the dark. Simone accepted a proposal packet, read a few pages, and closed it. "The furniture quality is excellent," she said. Marcus nodded. "That's what we heard." But she did not look triumphant. She looked, if anything, disappointed, and somehow that was worse than anger. Brandon remembered every comment he had made, every laugh. The memory of his own words echoed back at him, and they sounded uglier now than they had in his mouth. Then Marcus asked the question that should have ended everything. "Should I have legal begin preparing the purchasing agreements?" The silence stretched. Dozens of people waited for her answer. Brandon understood, with growing disbelief, that the decision in front of her was worth millions of dollars, and that the woman he believed could not afford a single table now held the power to determine the future of the largest contract this showroom had ever seen. But Simone did not answer right away. She was no longer thinking about the contract at all. She was thinking about the placard at the base of the dining table and the name printed on it, and the fact that she had come here today carrying a question she had been too afraid to ask for 20 years. And she still did not know if she wanted the answer. No one moved for several seconds. The showroom seemed suspended between two realities, the one where Brandon's assumptions still held, and the one already collapsing beneath the weight of the truth. Marcus waited patiently. He knew Simone well enough to recognize when she was thinking carefully. She never rushed important decisions. That discipline had built an investment empire respected across the country. She walked slowly to one of the tall windows overlooking Atlanta. The late sky glowed gold and amber. Her reflection hung against the glass. Not the billionaire, not the investor, simply a woman deciding what kind of day this would become. She remembered standing in her father's workshop as a girl, sawdust in the air, sunlight through old windows, his hands moving over a joint until it disappeared into the grain. "Character reveals itself when people believe there's nothing to gain," he used to say. She remembered something else, too, something she had never told a living person. She had been 23, ambitious, ashamed in a way she could not admit even to herself. The afternoon a man in a beautiful suit looked at her father in his work clothes and decided in 3 seconds that he did not matter. The man had said something small and cutting. The whole room had smiled. And Simone, who could have stood up, who could have said, "This is my father, and he is twice the man you are," had looked at the floor and said nothing, because she had wanted, more than she had ever wanted anything, to belong to the man in the suit's world instead of her father's. Within 2 years the workshop was gone. Her father lost the building his own hands had restored, lost his tools, lost the designs he had spent a lifetime perfecting. to a deal that had arrived smiling and left with everything. He died for years after that. And in all the years since, through every dollar she made, the thing that would not leave her was not his death. It was her silence. The floor she had looked at instead of looking at him. She turned back toward the room. Whatever she decided about the contract, she had already decided something larger, standing at that glass, though she did not yet know how much it would cost, or who, exactly, she would have to face to pay it. Please have legal continue preparing the agreements, she said calmly. Relief flashed across the employees' faces. Marcus smiled. Excellent. But Simone raised one hand. There's one condition. The room went still again. Before any contract is finalized, I'd like to understand how this company defines customer service. She let her gaze travel across the staff. Luxury isn't furniture. It isn't marble floors or price tags. Luxury is making people feel respected before you know what they can buy. No one interrupted. Even the customers listened. Then she turned to Brandon, and for the first time all afternoon their eyes met without a barrier between them. He looked older than he had an hour ago. I owe you an apology, he said. Several apologies. I made assumptions. I judged you before I knew anything about you. And I'm sorry. No one laughed now. Simone studied him for a long moment. She could see genuine regret. Not fear of losing a contract, but regret. There was a difference. Thank you for saying that, she said. People make mistakes. What matters is whether they learn from them. The tension that had gripped the room for hours began to loosen. Marcus checked his phone and murmured something about the board being pleased. Customers smiled. Emily's eyes shone. It had the exact shape of an ending. The gracious billionaire, the humbled manager, the lesson learned, the warm light pouring in. It felt finished. Which was the problem? Because as Simone gathered the proposal packet, she added one more line, almost as an afterthought, in the same gentle voice. I'd also like the partnership to include a customer experience review across every Meridian location. Full access to the service systems. My team will run it. Quietly, no need to alarm anyone. Marcus nodded easily. That can absolutely be arranged. Brandon exhaled, grateful, relieved, certain the worst was behind him. And no one in the room, not Marcus, not Brandon, not Emily, thought to wonder why a client who had already won everything she came for would want, more than the furniture, more than the apology, to get inside the company's records before she signed a single page. The vendor agreement was signed in principle within the week. The customer experience review folded in as a courtesy clause that no one at Hartwell read closely. Why would they? It sounded like the harmless vanity of a wealthy client who'd had her feelings hurt. But Simone's team was not a team of trainers. It was a forensic accountant named Dev Sharma, a data analyst, and a lawyer who specialized in the dull, devastating work of reading what companies hoped no one would. They were given login credentials to the Meridian customer system on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Dev called Simone at home. You need to see the tier field, he said. Every customer record carried a hidden classification, A or B. The intake records that fed it were a study in coded language, neighborhood, presentation, demeanor, fit for premium experience. Tier A customers were routed to inventory and white glove service. Tier B customers were routed, with quiet consistency, to a single place, the Meridian Advantage financing program. Dev pulled the Advantage terms. Then he went quiet on the line for a moment. Simone, he said, the APR is almost 3 times standard furniture financing. There's an asset recovery clause that lets them repossess on a single missed payment, and a default rate inside the program north of 40%. A pause. And the demographics on Tier B aren't subtle. I think you already know what they look like. She did. She had been one of them her whole life, in every room that ever decided in 3 seconds that she did not matter. So the contempt on the showroom floor, the laughter, the brochures handed to the wrong people, had a purpose underneath it. Brandon's instincts were not Brandon's. He had been trained, and the training fed something. But the question that mattered now was not what the machine did. It was who had built it, and how far up it went, and how many people had already tried to stop it. Find me the training memos, Simone said, and find out who signs them. There was a rustle of papers on the other end. Then Dev said, slowly, this one signed at the top. You're not going to like the name. She already didn't. She had read it at the base of a dining table a week earlier, and she had been bracing for it her whole adult life without ever admitting why. The answer to who tried before arrived the way the worst answers usually do, through someone who had been afraid for a long time. His name was Raymond Acosta. He had managed the Meridian Gallery in Charlotte for 6 years before he was let go for what his file called performance issues. Emily, who had quietly become the most useful person in the building, had heard his name whispered and passed it along. Simone met Raymond in a diner off the interstate. He brought a manila folder and would not let go of it for the first 10 minutes. "I started keeping copies the year I figured out what advantage was," he said. "Customers crying in my office. People who came in for a sofa and walked out owing $30,000. I flagged it to my regional director. You know what happened next? You became a performance issue. I became a performance issue." He finally slid the folder across the table. 3 other managers raised it over the years. 2 signed settlements. 1 just disappeared from the industry. There's a lawyer who handles it all. Cynthia Maddox. She's not a lawyer. She's a vacuum cleaner. Whatever she touches, you never hear about it again. Simone opened the folder. Internal emails. Default reports. A training memo, never meant to leave the building, instructing managers to qualify customers and steer non-premium prospects toward advantage to protect inventory experience for premium clientele. And at the bottom, a signature block. Approved, G. Hartwell, Chairman. She had known the name was on the building. She had not, until that moment, seen it on the order itself. Gerald Hartwell, not a logo, not an inheritance, but a man, signing his name to the instruction that turned contempt into profit. Her hand did not shake. She had trained it for decades not to. But the diner went very quiet around her for a moment. "There's more," Raymond said. "A reporter's been circling Hartwell for 2 years. Nadia Okafor. Every story she got close to, somebody signed a piece of paper and the trail went cold. She's got the pattern. She's never had the proof." He tapped the folder. "You've got the proof. She's got the megaphone." "Me," he laughed without humor. "I've got a wife and a mortgage and a settlement that says I never said a word of this to anyone." Simone looked at him. "Then why are you here?" Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Because I handed a brochure to a woman about my mother's age once, and she came back 6 months later to tell me they'd taken her dining room and her car. I've never been able to stop seeing her face." He stood, leaving the folder. "Do something with it. Somebody should, just once." She drove back to the city with the folder on the passenger seat. She had the proof. She had the reporter. She had the access. She did not yet have the one thing the machine had always counted on its enemies losing. And she was about to discover it was attached to the one wound she had spent 20 years refusing to look at. There was a complication, and it had a name she liked, which made it worse. Marcus Reed called her 2 days later. His voice was careful in a way it had never been. "Simone, my counsel flagged that your people pulled financing data outside the scope of a service review. I need to ask you what you're doing. I'm finding out who I almost signed a contract with." She told him. Not all of it. Not the part she had buried at the window, but the machine, the tears, the advantage trap, the buried complaints, the chairman's signature. The line was silent for a long time. "You understand the position this puts me in," Marcus said finally. "My firm's expansion is co-financed by Hartwell Capital. 6 properties, 1,100 jobs. If you blow this open, the financing freezes, the deal collapses, and a lot of people who had nothing to do with any of it lose everything, including, possibly, your own fund. You're an investor in my development, Simone. You'd be detonating something you're standing inside of. So what are you asking me to do, Marcus?" "I'm not asking you to do anything," he said quietly. "I'm telling you you're not the only one who'll pay for it. And then I'm asking you to decide anyway. Because if half of what you're saying is true, then I've been financing it without knowing, and I'd rather lose the deal than find that out and do nothing." It was not the answer she expected. It was better, and it made the choice harder, not easier, because now she could not even tell herself she stood alone. "I need time," she said. "Take it." "But Simone, Maddox already knows your team pulled the data. You don't have as much of it as you think." He was right about that. The machine had felt the lock turn, and the machine had defended itself many times before. Cynthia Maddox came to Simone's office in person, which was its own kind of message. She was pleasant. She was precise. She set a single document on the table and did not sit down. "Ms. Richardson, Hartwell Holdings is grateful for your customer experience review and, frankly, embarrassed by what it surfaced." Her smile was professionally warm. "We've terminated Brandon Cole. We've terminated the regional director who oversaw his store. We've commissioned an independent review of the Advantage program, suspended new enrollments, and we're prepared to announce all of it tomorrow morning, ahead of any unfortunate speculation. Simone said nothing. We're also prepared to honor the full vendor contract on enhanced terms, Maddox continued, and to express our gratitude for your discretion in the form of a confidential settlement. Generous. The kind that funds a great deal of the philanthropic work I understand you care about. She slid the document an inch closer. All it asks in return is that the underlying data remain where it belongs, internal. A few people made mistakes. Those people are gone. There's no need to burn down a company of 9,000 employees over the behavior of a manager and a flawed program. Is there? There it was. The whole machine, distilled into one reasonable woman in a beautiful suit. They would fire Brandon. They would fire the regional director. They would name the program a flaw, sacrifice the visible pieces and the structure, the sorting, the targeting. The chairman who signed the memo would survive intact, ready to grow a new friendly name in a year or two. It was, Simone understood, exactly what had silenced every person before her. Not threats, reasonableness. The generous, suffocating reasonableness of being offered everything you wanted in exchange for the only thing that mattered. You've done this before, Simone said. Maddox's smile did not move. I help organizations correct course. How many settlements have you signed over Advantage? Over the years. How many faces have you made disappear? The smile held, but something behind the eyes went flat and patient. The look of a person who has won this exact conversation many times. The statement goes out at 9 tomorrow, Maddox said, turning toward the door. The settlement offer expires at the same hour. I'd hate for you to be on the wrong side of a story that's already over. She paused with her hand on the frame. Take the win, Ms. Richardson. People who don't, in my experience, tend to lose everything and change nothing. She left, and for the first time since the diner, Simone felt the old gravity pulling at her, the seductive logic of walking away with full hands and clean shoes. She almost took it. That night she pulled the folder out and worked the numbers like a woman looking for permission to stop. The settlement would fund the foundation's clinics for a decade. The exposure would cost her fund, cost Marcus the development, put 1,100 people who had nothing to do with Advantage out of work, while a wall of NDAs and a vacuum cleaner lawyer made sure the story died like all the others. And the worst voice of all, the most reasonable one, whispered, they're firing Brandon. They're suspending the program. You changed something. Isn't changed something better than nothing? It was the same voice that had told a 23-year-old girl to look at the floor and not embarrass herself for the man in the work clothes. She drafted a reply to Maddox accepting the settlement. She read it 4 times. Her cursor hovered over send. Then Dev called, late, his voice strange. I matched the Advantage records back to Hartwell's predecessor entity, the company he ran in the 90s before the rebrand. Same machine, different name. There's a wave of asset recoveries from 99 through 2003. Small suppliers, craftsmen, family shops, financing offered, terms built to fail, assets absorbed, designs, tools, real estate, the works. Hundreds of them, Simone. It's a spreadsheet. Each one is a line. A pause. I almost didn't flag it. But one of the recovered files is a furniture workshop outside Savannah. The room went very still. The proprietor's name is Samuel Richardson. Dev's voice softened. I'm sorry. Is that? Yes, Simone said. That's my father. For 20 years, she had carried the name Hartwell the way you carry a stone in a coat you never take off. Heavy, half forgotten, never named. She had suspected. She had never let herself confirm it, because confirming it would mean facing the afternoon she looked at the floor. And now it was not a suspicion. It was a line in a spreadsheet. Her father, the man whose hands could make a joint disappear into the grain, reduced to a row in a recovery log, one of hundreds, processed by the same machine that was at this moment handing dining set brochures to women about his age and taking their cars. The man in the beautiful suit who had decided her father did not matter, all those years ago, had not been an individual cruelty. He had been an employee. Following a memo, Simone deleted the draft to Maddox. She had not come to that showroom by accident, and she would not pretend otherwise. She had come because the name on the placard was the name she had spent her life not saying. But she had come hoping to be wrong. She was not wrong. And the silence she had kept at 23, she understood now, had not protected her father, or her, or anyone. It had protected only the man whose signature was on the memo, for 20 more years, across hundreds more lines in the spreadsheet. The question was no longer whether she would act. It was whether the man who had been winning these arguments for 30 years had something left to make her stop. He did, and he intended to use it himself. He did not send Maddox the second time. Gerald Hartwell invited Simone to his home, a glass house above the river, full of furniture she now understood the true cost of, and received her like an old friend, which in a terrible way he almost was, because he had shaped the entire arc of her life and never once known her name. He was 71, silver-haired, gracious. He poured her water himself, a small calculated kindness. "You've built something remarkable, Ms. Richardson. I've admired your fund for years." He folded his hands. "Cynthia tells me you're considering something dramatic. I'd like to talk you out of it, not as a chairman, but as someone who's stood where you're standing, holding a weapon, deciding whether to use it." He smiled faintly. "I've held a few. Here's what they teach you. A weapon used always costs the one who uses it more than they expect. And what is this going to cost me, Mr. Hartwell? Less than it already has." He let that sit, then went on, almost gently. "I'll be honest with you, because you've earned it. While you were deciding, I wasn't. This morning I instructed Hartwell Capital to suspend the funding tranche on Reed Development's expansion, pending review. Marcus will hear within the hour, if he hasn't already. Your review access to our systems was revoked at noon. Your people are locked out as we speak. And there's a former employee of ours, a Mr. Acosta, whose settlement contains a rather firm clawback provision. My counsel reminded him of it this morning. He's been quite cooperative about confirming he gave you nothing. So," he sat back, "whatever you think you're holding, it's documents you can no longer authenticate, from a source who'll swear he never spoke to you, about systems you can no longer access. You've already lost your partner's deal. You've already lost your inside man. The only thing left to lose is your own name." He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a document she had not seen in 20 years and had hoped never to see again. A release. A waiver. Her own signature at 23, on a form a representative had put in front of her the day her father lost the appeal. A form she had signed without reading, in shame and a hurry to be gone, accepting a small sum, in full settlement of any and all claims. "You took our money once," Hartwell said, not unkindly, which made it worse. "It's a signed release with your name on it. If you go public, my lawyers won't call you a billionaire defending the little people. They'll call you a woman who sold her own father's claim for a check and came back 20 years later for a second payday. Reporters love a hypocrite more than a villain." He spread his hands. "I'm not threatening you. I'm showing you the board. There are no moves left that don't cost you everything. Take the settlement. Let an old man keep his name and keep yours." It was masterful. He had found, in a single morning, every load-bearing wall she had, her partner, her witness, her access, and the one wound she had never healed, and he had pressed his thumb into all of them at once. He had been doing this for 30 years. He was very, very good at it. For a long moment, Simone said nothing, and Gerald Hartwell, watching her, allowed himself to believe, as he had believed so many times before, with so many people, that he had won. He was, briefly, correct. He was correct for about 4 days. Simone drove home from the glass house with nothing. That was not a figure of speech. By the time she reached the city, Marcus had left 3 messages. Hartwell Capital had frozen the tranche. His lawyers were in a panic. 1,100 jobs were a phone call from evaporating. Dev confirmed the lockout. The credentials were dead. The system's gone behind a wall she had no legal route back through. And when she called Raymond, a number that had answered on the first ring a week ago, it rang and went to a voicemail that was full. When he finally texted, it was 2 lines. "They came to my house. I can't. I'm sorry. Please leave my name out of all of it. I never talked to you." She sat in the dark of her office with the folder Raymond had given her and understood, with a cold and total clarity, why no one had ever beaten this. It was not that the evidence didn't exist. The evidence was on her desk. It was that the evidence, the moment you tried to use it, became unusable. A source who would deny everything. A system you couldn't get back into to prove the documents were real, and a release with your own name on it waiting to turn the story from crime into grudge. Hartwell didn't bury the truth. He made the truth radioactive to whoever held it. That was the machine's real product. Not furniture. Not financing. Silence. Manufactured, again and again, from the materials of each person's own fear. She almost believed, that night, that he had won for good. Then, somewhere around 3 in the morning, she stopped looking at the problem like a woman who had lost, and started looking at it like her father had taught her to look at a broken joint. Not at the surface, but at the structure underneath. Raymond's settlement forbade Raymond from speaking. It said nothing about Simone providing documents she had obtained legally through a contractual review before the access was revoked. Dev had copies, time-stamped, pulled while the credentials were live and the clause was in force. The lockout came after. The provenance held. And Maddox's Great Wall. The dozens of NDAs she had built over 20 years to keep each silenced manager alone in the dark. That wall had a flaw Maddox had never had to think about, because no one had ever gotten this far. Each NDA was a confession that there had been something worth hiding. Laid side by side, they were not a defense. They were an inventory. Simone did not need Raymond to testify. She needed a body with subpoena power to want the settlements, and a reporter ready the instant they did. By dawn she had stopped grieving the loss and started building the door. 3 of them, in fact, so that no single piece of paper, no single phone call to a frightened man's house, could close them all before the others noticed. She did not do it carelessly, because careless was how the others had failed. The folder Raymond had risked everything to provide. The data Dev had pulled while the access was live, time-stamped and authenticated. The historical recovery spreadsheet with its hundreds of lines and one workshop outside Savannah. The chairman's signed memo. All of it went, at the same hour, to 3 destinations at once. To Nadia Okafor, the reporter who had the pattern but never the proof. To the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, with a formal complaint and a request for investigation, including a request to subpoena every confidential settlement Hartwell had signed over Advantage. And to a federal regulator with jurisdiction over lending discrimination. Nadia called 40 minutes after the files landed, her voice tight, with something between fury and grief. I've been chasing this for 2 years. Every time I got close, someone signed a piece of paper and the trail went cold. I had 3 sources recant in a single week once. A breath. You understand they'll come after you personally. There's a release with your name on it. 20 years old. They'll lead with it. I know. Put it in. There was a pause. Say that again. Put it in the story. My signature. My father. The check I took at 23. The afternoon, I looked at the floor instead of looking at him. If I'm going to ask people to look at the worst thing Hartwell ever did, I won't hide the worst thing I ever did. Simone's voice did not waver. Let them judge both. He thinks the release makes me a hypocrite. It only makes me one more person his machine got to. The difference is I'm telling you, and I'm telling the Attorney General, and I'm doing it with the documents in your hand. He can make me look like a hypocrite. He cannot make the spreadsheet lie. Nadia was quiet a moment. That's not how people protect themselves. I tried protecting myself for 20 years, Simone said. It protected him. The complaint, with documents attached, did the one thing 30 years of silenced employees never could. It gave a prosecutor a reason to ask for the settlements. And the moment the subpoena went out for them, the wall Maddox had built, the proof that there had been something, many somethings, worth paying to hide, stopped being Hartwell's armor and became the map of his crime. It did not collapse all at once. Real collapses never do. The turning point was not a courtroom and not a headline. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Nadia's story ran, when Raymond Acosta called Simone back. I saw it, he said. His voice was rough. The story. You put your own name in it. Your own release. You didn't have to do that. Neither did you. In the diner. He was quiet. Then, the AG's office called me. Because of the settlements they subpoenaed, they already had the documents, the dates, the pattern. They didn't need me to break my clause. They just needed me to confirm what was already in front of them. And they said the clawback wouldn't survive a court once the underlying scheme was unlawful. A long breath. I'm not the only one who called them. There's a guy from the Birmingham store. A woman who managed 2 locations in Tennessee. We all thought we were the only one. We all signed the same paper from the same lawyer. We've been sitting alone in the dark for years, and it turns out the dark was the same room. His voice cracked. I'm in. On the record. I should have done it years ago, but I didn't have. He stopped. Nobody had ever made it safe to be the second person. You made it safe to be the second person. That was the thing Hartwell had never had to face, because no one had ever survived being the first. His weapon was isolation. The instant the settlements were on a prosecutor's desk and one billionaire had put her own name beside the victims, the silenced were no longer alone, and a lawyer cannot vacuum up a flood. After that, the structure came down the way a building comes down once the members are already cut, slowly, then altogether. 2 more state attorneys general requested the data. Meridian operated in their states, and the tier codes did not respect borders. The federal regulator opened a formal action. Maddox resigned to pursue other opportunities. The board, which had been very pleased indeed when the contract was first discussed, discovered an urgent appetite for distance. Hartwell Capital, facing investigation, quietly unfroze and then fled the Reed development financing rather than have its terms read aloud in a hearing. Marcus replaced it within the month, the 1,100 jobs intact, a detail that gave Simone more private satisfaction than any of the headlines. And Gerald Hartwell, who had built an empire on the certainty that he could always find a person's weak point and press his thumb into it, discovered that the woman he had cornered in his glass house had taken the wound he handed her and used it as the anchor that held her in place against everything he threw. He resigned as chairman within the month. Not in handcuffs. Simone had braced for that and let it go early. But the civil penalties were enormous. The consent decree was not negotiable. The Advantage program was dismantled by court order, its asset recovery clauses voided, its terms entered into the public record. And the part that mattered most made no headlines at all. The NDAs were declared unenforceable as instruments of an unlawful scheme. Every silenced person was free to speak, free to file, free to be made, as much as money can ever make anyone whole. A restitution fund was established. It was not generous. It was correct, which is rarer. And on the list of historical claims reopened by the dismantling of the predecessor entity's recoveries, between hundreds of other names the machine had counted on no one ever reading aloud, was a furniture workshop outside Savannah and a man named Samuel Richardson. The morning the restitution checks were authorized, Simone drove to Savannah alone. The workshop was gone, long gone, the land now a parking lot behind a strip of stores. She stood at the edge of it for a while in the early light. There was nothing to see. That was, perhaps, the point. She did not get the workshop back. She did not get her father back. There was no version of justice that returned his hands to him, or gave him the years, or let her stand in that long-ago showroom and put her arm through his and say, "This is my father," loudly enough for the room to hear. Some doors, once closed, stay closed. That was the cost the machine had always counted on, that the harm was old, the harmed were tired, and the dead could not testify. The restitution that came to her father's estate she did not keep. She used it to start a small program through a foundation in his name, grants and protection for exactly the kind of family supplier the machine had specialized in destroying. Craftsmen, repair shops, people with good hands and bad financing. She named it the Samuel Richardson Workshop Fund. It was not enough. Nothing would have been enough. But it was the opposite of silence. And after 20 years, she had learned that the opposite of silence was the only thing that had ever been in her power to give. Standing in the parking lot, she thought she might finally feel something like peace. She did not. What she felt was quieter and more honest. She felt unburdened of the lie that staying silent had ever protected anyone but the man it was designed to protect. The shame of the release she had signed at 23 did not vanish. But it no longer ran her. She had done with it the only useful thing a person can do with their worst moment. She had made it cost the right man instead of the wrong one. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, she walked back into the Atlanta showroom. It had survived, stripped from Hartwell's holdings during the restructuring, sold to a new ownership group. The gallery now operated under a different name and a court-monitored set of practices. There were no tier codes in the customer system. There was no Advantage program. There was, instead, a small frame notice near the entrance that most customers walked past, stating in plain language the rights the dismantling had won them. Emily was still there. She was running the floor now, promoted in the new structure, trusted, the person every newer associate watched to learn how it was supposed to be done. She crossed to Simone the moment she saw her, and for a second neither of them said anything. You stayed, Simone said. Somebody had to make sure it actually changed this time, Emily said. Not the lobby. The thing underneath the lobby. She smiled. You taught me to look at the thing underneath. They walked the floor together. The light came through the glass the same as it always had, gold across the wood and the stone, indifferent and beautiful. The furniture was the same furniture. It was, Simone reflected, the strangest thing about justice, that the rooms look identical afterward, that the marble does not change, that you have to know what happened to feel the difference, and most people never will. Brandon Cole was not there. He had been fired in the first wave, the visible sacrifice, the one blamed for the machine that built him. Simone had felt no satisfaction in it. He had done real harm, and he had also been trained by an institution that profited from his worst instincts and discarded him the instant it was convenient. Both were true. She had stopped needing to decide which mattered more. He called me once, Emily said, as if reading her. After it all came out. He said finding out he'd been a tool didn't make him feel less guilty. It made him feel more. She paused. I don't know if that's redemption, but it's not nothing. No, Simone agreed. It's not nothing. Near the exit, she paused beside the tall window overlooking downtown. The city stretched toward the horizon under a sky going soft and orange. Cars moved below. Office windows caught the last of the light. Life continued exactly as it always had, indifferent to the lesson that had unfolded inside this building, unaware of the machines still running in 100 rooms it could not see. That was the part that would not let her rest, even now, even with the fund and the consent decree and her father's name on a door. For every Hartwell who fell, there were others. For every advantage dismantled, another friendly name was being drafted somewhere by someone reasonable in a beautiful suit. For every room where a stranger had finally walked in and refused to look at the floor, there were 1,000 rooms with no one in them, but the people being sorted and the people doing the sorting, and the sunlight coming through the glass on both of them just the same. She had changed one machine. She knew exactly how few that was. Emily came to stand beside her at the glass. You look like you're already somewhere else. I'm wondering how many of these rooms there still are, Simone said. The ones nobody walks into. Emily was quiet a moment. Then, there's one fewer than there used to be. Simone smiled, faintly, and watched the light fall across the floor. She gathered her things and went out through the glass doors into the cool evening. No photographers waited. No headlines followed. No one applauded. A few of the newer employees never realized who she was, and that, as always, made her happiest. Behind her, the gallery stood a little straighter than it once had. The reflections of the setting sun stretched warm and quiet across the floor, the same floor where a man had once laughed and offered to quit, never knowing that the woman he mocked had already lost more to his employer than he could imagine, and had come, after 20 years, to take none of it back, and all of it back at the same time. The doors closed softly behind her, and somewhere out in the golden amber city, in a room she would never see, someone was being handed a brochure for a program with a friendly name by a person who had been trained not to notice their face. The work was not over. It is never over. But for one room, on one afternoon, the silence had finally been broken, and the silence that came after it, at last, felt exactly like justice.